Good evening, everyone. I am Joanna Leifer. I'm the Program Committee Chair for New York City's League of Women Voters. Welcome to our second Zoom evening with the League for this summer. For you new people, you probably don't know, but my committee organizes a monthly speakers program that deals with a current political or social topic. The meetings are open to League members and to members of the community. So, but also just to let you know, this particular Zoom is being taped. So if that's an issue for anybody, you can either take yourself off video or whatever. Regarding us, every month, my committee puts together an event. We used to do this every month at the New York Society for Ethical Culture at Central Park West. But since the pandemic, we've begun meeting via Zoom. And we welcome everybody who is coming today and hope that you who are new to the League will come to some of our other events. The topic for this evening is how we as New Yorkers can influence New York City's budget in 2021 and 22. As many of you know, probably most of you know, this year's budget was slashed by approximately $8 billion. This will significantly impact our city services. So this year has pretty much been decided, but we can begin our strategies on where money can be placed in 21 and 22 budget. And our speaker, Adrian Kivelson, who is an expert on city operations, will tell you how. Next month, we have another program that should be very interesting. We invited Adrian Austin, the acting deputy chancellor for New York City Department of Education, to join us and to discuss the Department of Education's plans and strategies for schools during this pandemic. Before we begin our program, I wanted to introduce Ashmi Schultz, who is our membership committee chair, but I don't believe she's here. Is she on here?
Joanna, unfortunately, Ashmi was not able to join us tonight due to work reasons.
So Leslie, who is our behind the scenes person, Leslie Siegel, who is also our co-president, is going to give you a little information on the League for you who are new to us. We hope you all find this very interesting and you'll be part of us again. Leslie?
Thanks so much, Joanna. Hi, everybody. I'm really glad you could all join us for our second At Home with the League program. I'm super excited about tonight's topic, I have to say. It's very timely, as you can imagine. And thanks to all of you who are already members of the League. You know, we really appreciate your support. And for those of you who aren't, let me tell you a little bit about, the League and what we do. So the League of Women Voters of the City of New York is 101 years old. We actually predate both the state and the national leagues. We were formed in 1919 in order to provide women with the education they needed to use the vote, since women in New York actually got the franchise in 1917. And since then, we have expanded our mission to ensure that everyone has the right to vote, to help educate voters, to encourage everyone in New York City to participate in civic engagement, whether that means through direct action, through the legislative process, through the voting booth. And we continue to do that today. I'm actually going to talk about one of the things that state has been helping us with in a couple of minutes. So I'd love to encourage you all, if you're not members of the League, to join the League. And I'll put our website in the chat. It's a great way to support our mission and help people become more civically engaged. And we're really going to be focusing a lot on helping people in underserved communities and people in the kind of millennial and Gen Z demographics to, kind of turn their political energy that you see in the marches into action at the ballot box as well, and engagement with the legislative process. So let me type that into the chat so you'll see our website. I put another couple of things in there already that you'll see. So we certainly hope to see you at more of these, as Joanna said, and we hope that some of you will join us, or all of you will join us. So with that, let me turn over and talk about a few things that are happening right now. So I want to thank all of you who took our call to action to heart and contacted your state legislators to pass the online voter registration bill for New York City. For those of you who are not aware of what that is, the New York City Campaign Finance Board has already built an online registration portal that they can turn on. They need the legislature and the governor to pass and sign a bill to allow them to do that. So there's one bill in the Senate and another bill in the Assembly that are basically the same bill. The great news is the Senate bill passed this afternoon. So that is, I think, fantastic. And as you can imagine, in this time of pandemic, online voter registration for New York City is so important. It's going to make it much easier for us to register voters, and there's been a precipitous drop in voter registration year over year. For those of you who may have joined us who aren't in New York City, just so you know, this is on the slate for the rest of New York State as well, but due to lack of funding, it's been pushed off. In New York City, we have this possibility simply because the Campaign Finance Board has already built the portal, so just a little FYI. There's still work to be done to get it passed in the Assembly. So if you haven't already contacted your Assembly member, and in fact, if you already have contacted them, please contact them again and urge them to vote yes on A8473. And the site where you can look up your representatives is in the chat. Moving on, I'd like to tell you that our voter registration trainings have restarted virtually. So if you're interested in registering voters or running a voter registration drive, and you haven't already attended one of our sessions, our next session is on Wednesday, July 29th at 10 a.m. The link to register is in the chat, and the email blast will go out tomorrow for people to register that way as well. And the last thing I'd like to say is if you would like to help voters in the run-up to the election, we're also training people to answer our phones and answer voter questions. And if you're interested, please mail office@lwvnyc.org and ask about our telephone information services training. We'll put all of that in the chat. It's a huge way that you can actually be part of the elections process and help voters understand the things that confuse them, where they're registered, where they have to show up to vote, where their polling sites are they registered to vote, how do they register to vote, how do they get absentee ballots. We will train you on all of those things and also how to find that information on the Board of Elections website. So again, I will put that in the chat, and with that, I will turn it back over to Joanna. Thanks.
Thank you, Leslie. That's a lot of good information, and that's really good to hear about the vote in the Senate today. There is another program that I want to announce. Most of you might know that this is the centennial anniversary of the ratification of the 19th Amendment, which is the amendment that grants women the right to vote. To celebrate this monumental occasion, a group aptly called Monumental Women raised $1.5 million to create a statue featuring 3 women, Sojourner of Truth, Susan B. Anthony, and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, all women who were active in women's rights. This statue has been created and it is being unveiled in Central Park on August 26th. So this is a very monumental moment, and there is another reason for this as well. This is the first statue in Central Park that features real women. There are 24 statues in Central Park of people, and all of them are men. There are a couple of statues that are supposed to personify women. There's a statue of Alice in Wonderland, and there's one of Mother Goose, 2 fantasies. They've also developed some fairies and some witches, but we don't have any real women. So August 26th will be the first women or statue for women. It's going to be a terrific moment. In a moment, I'm going to introduce our speaker, but I first want to mention a few little rules of Zoom protocol. First of all, I mentioned at the beginning that we are being taped. So if that's a problem for anybody, just put yourself off video. We've also muted everybody during this presentation so that there will be no background noise. Afterwards, we will have after the presentation, we'll have about 15 or 20 minutes of Q&A. People who have questions can go down to the bottom of their screen where there's a chat function, and you can type in your question. Leslie, who is working behind the scenes, is going to be able to call them out, and Adrian will answer them. So now we're going to get back to our real program, which is our speaker, Adrian Kivelson. Adrian has a long career in public service for federal, state, and city governments. She was the district administrator for 2 members of Congress, chief of staff for a member of the city council, and for a member of the state assembly. She was the associate director of the New York State Division for Women under Governor Mario Cuomo, and she served many years in government housing agencies, including the Office of Rent Administration of the New York State Division of Housing and Community Revival, which is a really long title, and the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. Adrian is also the author of a league publication called What Makes New York City Run. This is a terrific small book which explains a lot about the city. You can buy it through us or online on Amazon, where you can get an ebook which is attached to links. So that works out really great for them. So without further ado, we're going to introduce Adrian Kivelson, who is an expert on how the government works, both inside and out. Adrian.
Thank you very much, Joanna. I'm not sure how much of an expert I am, but I've been an observer for over 40 years. And so I would like to share some of my observations and experiences in working with city government, and in particular, working with city government through the League, because that's how I got into this. I was a member of the League, have been a member of the League for over 40 years. And at one point I did some brochures for the League, and I did some testimony, and the president of the League, then President Lynn Carver, came to me and asked me if I would write a book about New York City government. We had a little flyer that was a threefold, which we were very popular with. We do all these threefold flyers. We print them out ourselves. Some of them we even lettered ourselves. And she asked me if we could take the What Makes New York City Run flyer and expand it into a book. There was a lot of change going on in city government in the late 70s and early 80s, and Lynn wanted us to come up with something which would make it possible for citizens to understand how they could interact with city government. I don't know where I had the audacity to say yes, but I did say yes, and we're light years away from that. When I started writing the book, I started with a copy of the city charter, which isn't in print anymore, and a yellow pad. And I spent a summer trying to understand the city charter, the city government, and try to start putting together this book. And that was happening as my 7-year-old and 9-year-old were running around the house and chasing each other. But somehow the book got done, and we published in 1979. These were very interesting times. In 1978, the city was just working itself out of near bankruptcy. And we also were facing a constitutional challenge. These two challenges really set us up for where we are today, and in fact made a better form of government, which will make us more able to deal with the crises that we're facing today with coronavirus and with racial inequities and public protests that was very much envisioned when we passed the 2020 budget. The two crises, the bankruptcy and constitutional challenge, and I want to speak to them a little bit, a little history. It really spoke to New York City being a very generous city. We had public housing, we had city hospitals, We had public playgrounds. We had a city university, which in the late 70s, early 80s was free tuition. We really were a generous city. This was Republican and Democrat. This was the tradition of New York City. And in the late 60s, along came the Great Society. And Lyndon Johnson's Great Society offered new opportunities for New York to participate in and provide social welfare programs. We were gung-ho to do all of it, and we did, until the Vietnam War entered the picture and the federal government realized or decided they could not pay for guns and butter. And these social programs were very severely cut back at that time. But the city didn't really want to cut them back and tried for as long as they could to keep programs funded and going until they just couldn't do it anymore. They had put expense items into the capital budget. They tried to sell notes against them. We really had a financial structure that more resembled a candy store than the Federal Reserve. And in 1975, it basically came crashing down. It came crashing down on us. This wasn't a matter of corruption. It wasn't a matter of self-enrichment. It wasn't even double dealing. It really was a lot of people who thought they were doing best for the city and didn't really have a grasp on where that money was coming from. And it was totally nonpartisan. We had Democratic mayors. We had, in these years, we had Robert Wagner. We had Abe Beame, who'd also been a controller before he became mayor. We had John Lindsay as mayor. We had Nelson Rockefeller as governor. And it was a field of good intentions, which got us into trouble in 1975, and which we then had to work our way out of. So the first place you go is to Congress and ask for money. Now, New York, from then till now, has always been more of a donor nation to the federal government than a taker. And even today, Governor Cuomo issued facts on how much we give to Washington that we don't get back. But that's always been the case. And so New York went to Washington and said, we need help. We need some help. Those of you who were around in the 70s, you may remember a headline on the Daily News, the big full-page headline that said, Ford to New York dropped dead. Obviously, that could not stand as an answer, and our New York congressional delegation went to work in Washington. Now, I want to point out something. The New York congressional delegation, the state congressional delegation in 1975 and 76 had 39 members. We now have 27 members. Congress is the same size it was in 1975, but we have continuously lost members of Congress because of population shifts. And we're paying a price for that, or we will pay a price for it. We have 13 members of Congress now who represent all or part of New York City. I don't know how many there were in 1975, but obviously considerably more. But Congress did come up with money, and there were negotiations, and Congress came up with the money. We didn't have a 24-hour media circus going on, so New York City congressmen really did not get called down for voting for sugar subsidies and tobacco subsidies in order to get the support of Southern congressmen. So we did get money, but we paid it all back. We got the money, and then we turned to the state. We didn't actually turn to the state. The state came and took over in many ways. And I think I should stop here to talk about our relationship with the state. We are the largest city in the state, but we are a creature of the state. We get our charter from the state of New York. We've been chartered as a city since 1898, and there is a home rule law which says that we can pass laws which affect our affairs and our government. Very amorphous wording. And we have spent 102 years arguing over what that means and what home rule really is. And there are many things we just can't do. We can't levy any taxes. We can't borrow any money without the approval of the state. Our education system, the standards come from the state. We have a city of apartment houses, unlike any place else in New York, but the multiple dwelling law, which applies to buildings of 6 units or more, is state law. Rent regulation is a state law. I could go on. And all of those things require approval by the state and anything happens in New York. New York City can levy real estate taxes, but the rate is controlled by state law. So we're very limited. If we want to borrow money, as the mayor suggested this year, we would need the approval of the state. And I have to add, when we say that I'm going to talk about the city council and the city budget. But the fact of the matter is, if we want to make some of the changes that are suggested or needed, we're going to have to get state approval. So everybody should find out who their state legislators are and know that at some point they're going to have to plug in with state legislators. But in 1975, Hugh Carey, I think in many ways came to the rescue of New York City. He assembled a very prestigious group of city officials, of business people, of civic leaders, and of union leaders. And the union leaders were very crucial in what then came down to pass. The state legislature put something into place called the Emergency Financial Control Board to see that the city was spending money properly. And they issued bonds under the credit of the state. These were the Municipal Assistance Corporation. They were called MAC bonds. And the MAC bonds were bought very largely by city institutions and the unions. The UFT and the Municipal Workers Union, DC 37, and the Municipal Workers Union were very instrumental in helping to fund the bonds that were used to save New York City. And I don't know if I'm not a union member, but I don't know that they get enough credit for what they did in 1975 to help us save the city. They also had, in the city, they formed a new charter revision commission. Whenever the charter can be revised by the council, but if you want to do major revisions of the charter, then a charter revision commission is called into being. And we just had one recently, so we know how that works. And they brought in a charter revision commission to come up with a modern and transparent financial structure for the city. And for once, the city was told, you have to follow generally accepted accounting procedures. It's mind-boggling to me that they didn't have to follow them before, but now they certainly did. The structure that the charter revision came up with really built in outside audits of everything that goes on in the city, required a capital plan so that we just weren't changing the capital budget here and there every year. The controller had to report regularly to the city. We put stronger controls on budget modifications. That's the thing that lets the mayor move money around after the budget is passed. And was a total reconfiguration of the financial structure. Now that was done in 76, 77. That was the first book that I wrote. But as technology, that was clear. It was to be very transparent. But as technology has improved, it's gotten even better. You really can find out anything in a timely fashion about what's going on with the budget of the city of New York. It's all online, it's all open, it's all available if you understand all of it. But there are also mechanisms that will help you if you don't understand budgeting. Now, one of the things that's most exciting about this is they put a budget calendar into the charter. Leslie, if you could put up the budget calendar, we could talk about that a little bit. Okay, now the budget calendar actually has 23 steps, but we selected the steps which most directly impact on how the public can become involved in budget making. And so we know that July 1st, they passed the budget. They adopted a budget this year on July 1st, and the new fiscal year began on July 1st. Now, for one of the charter revision commissions that came along, community boards have been around since the 60s in New York. While still advisory, they've gotten more and more involved in the actual deciding of budgets and land use things than they ever have before. And they've made the community boards part of the budget making process. First thing you all should do is get in touch with your community board and get put on their mailing list. So you'll hear about these hearings that are going on. In the community board start working in the spring, in the summer, after the budget's passed, in anticipation of the following year's budget. One thing that the 78th Charter Revision Commission did was it made the delivery of city services coterminous, stupid word, but we use a lot of words like that, to comply with the boundaries of community boards. So that each community board in the city has a community district service cabinet with representatives of the agencies that deliver services in that community. Social services, housing services, and the police. Every police precinct now covers a community board area. And they meet regularly to discuss issues in the community and services that are needed. And in the summer, they start to talk about what services they think they want to have happen in the borough in the community board in the following year. For example, they want to deal with all their tree problems and the roots coming up. They want to pave more streets, which streets. They want to fix up a playground, maybe a whole range of items. And they start planning how they're going to present them so they can get the services funded in the following year. And then they hold public hearings. And the community is invited to come and testify on what needs they feel are needed in the community. Most of these are service needs, but there may be some capital issues too. But most of these are people come in and say that I want a stop sign on my street, or we need the trees pruned on one street, or we need more police patrol, or we want to have a community health center. And it can be a full range, and anybody in the community can come and testify. Unfortunately, you're not going to know about it unless you're on the mailing list. So we suggest that you get on the mailing list. If you're a block association or your apartment complex wants to be involved in this, then you should get on the mailing list of the community board so that you can find out when they're having these hearings. You can go and testify, and anybody, if things are very heated, you sign up and you may have to wait all night to testify. I like to tell people that it's very nice to go and state your views, but to go with a little slip of paper with 5 items on it is almost a waste of time. Anytime you're going to testify or speak anywhere, you should write out what you're going to say. So you could submit it to the board or whomever you're speaking before so it can become part of the public record. It doesn't have to be formal. It should state your positions. And if more people, if you can really get more people to support your position, I don't think petitions do anything, but I do think letters do, and I do think that people going to support somebody testifying to have your plaque in the back of the room does help. So the more you can coalesce with other groups, the more it helps. So there, between October and November, there are a whole series of the controller gives reports. The management, the Office of Management and Budget have to provide reports to the City Council. And there are dates in this budget calendar for all of those things. You'll notice there actually, you see the numbers, and the numbers are actually in the city charter. It actually says by January 16th, the mayor must submit a preliminary budget. By December 15th, the controller must report to the City Council. Those numbers are there. They've been there since this was done in 1978. There's a little flexibility. If it's not one day, it's the next. It may be 2 days. Occasionally, the council will pass a bill delaying the submission of that report, and that's done publicly. It's very pro forma. Pretty much everybody adheres to that. The mayor submits a preliminary budget and a preliminary report on the city's capital debt. This year, the mayor's preliminary budget was for $95 billion. $95 billion, remember that number. He submitted the report, and in February, the community boards go back and start meeting again to see which of their items were included in that city budget and how they want to organize to get those services provided. They usually at that point start meeting with the borough president. The borough president can make recommendations to the budget, to the mayor. The borough president can even make stronger than recommendations. The borough president has some ability to have things included in the budget. There's a formula for that for each borough president. Then the city council holds public hearings on the preliminary budget. Now, public hearings mean public hearings. They mean people can go and listen. They don't necessarily mean that everybody who wants to testify can come and testify. Very often, the testimony is invited. They'll invite experts on subjects. They'll invite, and this goes for any city council hearing, not just the budget hearings. They'll invite organizations that are interested in the issue they're discussing. The League of Women Voters is very often invited to testify. Sometimes we testify as part of a panel of organizations that all have the same interests. Sometimes we tend to testify independently. If the other issue, and I sat through enough hearings to know this, you think this is going to start soon, but before you know it, the borough presidents show up to testify. Somebody from the state legislature shows up to testify, and they're always put in front of the people who have signed up to testify. So now we're sitting at a budget hearing for a long time. Council members go in and out. Any council member can sit in on any hearing and ask questions, but they go in and out because there may be 2 or 3 hearings going on at the same time. If you've gone to council hearings, you know there are 2 hearing rooms in the city council. There's a hearing room and there's a chamber, and you can have 2 hearings going on simultaneously. There are council offices across the street. I think it's 250 Broadway, and there are hearing rooms at 250 Broadway. So there can be multiple hearings going on at the same time, council members coming and going. So again, the suggestion is you want to submit testimony, write it out and submit it. And submit it also to your council member, even if your council member is not on that committee, because your council member is the one you're going to influence, not the chair of the committee. You're going to influence your council member. So always send testimony to your council member. And then the mayor, the mayor's then on April 26th, and specifically, but it could be the 26th, he submits the executive budget to the city. This is the budget that has resulted from all of these reports from management and budget, from the controller, from the independent budget office, and from testimony. And this is the executive budget. So the mayor submitted on January 16th, the mayor submitted a $95 billion budget to the city council. And on April 26th, the mayor's executive budget had come down to $89 billion. I mean, we're talking about less than 3 months. We went all the way down. And the mayor submits the executive budget to the city council. Then the mayor and the city council negotiate a budget agreement, which is voted on by the council. The mayor cannot vote on the agreement. If they haven't reached an agreement by June 5th, then the budget that was in effect for the current year is extended until they reach a decision on a new budget. That sounds like just a little thing. It's an interesting little thing because if you remember, the state of New York, if it doesn't pass its budget by April 1st, they stop the clock, but they basically can't spend any money. The federal government went into that several times. They didn't come up with the budget by the deadline, and people were furloughed. I had the displeasure, I think, of working in the state legislature one year where there was a fight between the Senate and the Assembly, and we were out for 6 weeks. We were working, but we weren't being paid. I think the way that was finally resolved was a local Albany bank gave us interest-free loans. But that can happen in the state, that can happen in the federal government, but not in the city because we extend the budget. when the mayor and the city council agree on the budget, the mayor does not vote for it. The mayor can't object to reductions in the budget that the city council makes. He can object to additions or changes that change things. And he has 5 days in which to notify the council of what he disagrees with. And the council has 10 days in which to consider whether they're going to override his veto. It's sort of a veto or objection by a 2/3 vote. Somehow we end up with an adopted budget. Now, what happened this year was really extraordinary. And it was extraordinary because we basically went through the entire budget process before things just went south. And they went south in a really big way. So the community boards had come in with their recommendations and what they needed, and they held their hearings. The mayor, the council had held hearings, had listened to community people and organizations about what they wanted. They had questioned witnesses from city agencies on how things were actually running, and they were ready to act on a budget. And then coronavirus happened, and George Floyd was murdered. And at that point, you have less than a month to pass a budget, when every agency in the city and every community organization had been working under different circumstances. It was very difficult, amazing that they did anything at all to change that budget, but it was almost an impossibility to create a new budget in the time frame that they had. So we have to look back at, it's not very far. July 1st happened. The community boards are already starting to consider. The budget process starts again. And if you want to get involved, now really is the time. Start with the community board, get on the mailing list. Get on a mailing list of your council member. Get on a mailing list of your state legislator. And these are ways that you can start now to figure out how you are going to impact on the budget. I mentioned one other thing, that we had a constitutional crisis that also impacted how the city changed and how it impacts on this year's actions. Our constitutional crisis was that our form of government was challenged as violating one person, one vote. How does that happen in New York City? Well, it happens easily. Before we had one city council as our legislature, for many, many years, the history of New York City, we had something called the Board of Estimate. And the Board of Estimate was made up of the mayor, the controller, the president of the city council, an office which no longer exists, but was changed to the public advocate, and the 5 borough presidents. The citywide officials each had 2 votes. The 5 borough presidents each had 1 vote, and they shared budget-making power with the council. Unfortunately, in those years before we really had a structure like this, the Board of Estimate had undue pressure over the council. The council didn't get the kind of information that it needed. The negotiation went on between the members of the Board of Estimate. Council was small. We only had 35 members of the council, and the council's powers were limited. But there's a problem when you think about it. Staten Island had 1 vote, and Brooklyn had 1 vote. And there's no way that you can look at 1 person, 1 vote, and say that they're equal weighted between Staten Island and Brooklyn. When Ed Koch became mayor in 1978, he realized that this was going to happen. It had already been challenged. It was now going through the courts. And he appointed a Charter Revision Commission again to figure out how to restructure government to eliminate this inconsistency in 1 person, 1 vote. And what they did, and it was a wonderful Charter Revision Commission headed by first Richard Ravitch and then Frederick Schwartz, who had been our corporation counsel in the city. It was a marvelous commission. It did wonderful things. And what they did basically was they eliminated the Board of Estimate because there wasn't any way to make the boroughs equal. It wasn't going to happen. So they eliminated the Board of Estimate and enlarged the city council and gave the city council much more power than it ever had. So the city council is the body that has to vote on the budget. Mayor can't push through the budget. Even though we have a strong mayor, that's a very important thing. Gave the city council power over land use decisions. Gave the city council it created the independent budget office. It brought the community boards into the budget process. And it really provided a path for citizen participation in the budget making process. So between those two things, the reconfiguration of our financial system and the redesign of our government, we ended up, I think, my opinion, with a government that really that provides access for citizens to really have a role. Considering how large our city is and how remote it seems to be, we really can play a role in how the budget's made. Now, this year is going to be a challenge because, as I said, every year since 2000, the budget went up. So every year since 2000, every agency got a little bit more, and every community group got a little bit more, whether it was a lot or not. Everybody got something and nobody complained very much. And now, first, we have obviously real dissension in the city over how some services and police services are provided. But we are about to face the most drastic cuts that I think we've faced since 1975. The city structure is such that I don't think we're going bankrupt, but we're going to have drastic cuts in service. And if you have any doubt about that, I suggest you read the article in the New York Times today about the MTA, which has our subway system and bus system, and has had a 90% decrease in ridership and fares, and is facing $15 billion budget cuts. That's just one piece of this. We know that the state budget was passed before we really felt the impact of the coronavirus. And we have to anticipate that there are going to be substantial cuts coming down from the state because the state has also lost money. We're not real estate taxes, nobody's paying them. We're not collecting fees and parking violations, except I got a ticket for going through a school zone. But other than that, and I want to fight it, but I think the city's so poor, maybe I should pay it, even though I think it's unfair because it was on a weekend. We're going to have drastic cuts, and that's when community really can play a role, because we're going to be competing with each other for services on what's going to be cut and what will be saved. And I think it's going to be a challenge for the city council. It's going to be a challenge for the mayor. I think that if people are concerned about certain things, now is the time they have to make their voices heard, because there are going to be a lot of cuts and a lot of hurt feelings and a lot of hardship. But I don't think we'll go bankrupt. So that's sort of my rundown. I want to, if we can, I've come up with some other resources that I think, if you want to get involved in this, might be helpful. And you know, when I wrote the books, there weren't all of these websites, and now we're very website conscious. The New York City official website, which gets you to every agency, is here. It's www.nyc.gov. 311, NYC 311 is the phone thing. You pick up 311 and you complain. But you can also do that online. And what you can do is you can file a complaint online. You can get an application and file a complaint online. You can find out the status of service requests that have been made in the past. We now have open data. Everything is open, and therefore it's hard. It's not easy. I don't know how to use that open data search, but it can be done. And then each of the agencies, each of the city council, the controller, the public advocate, they each have websites. The city council website also has records, and sometimes the council meetings are live streamed. They're all recorded. They're all available to watch online. You can even sign up to testify at a hearing online. I didn't mention participatory budgeting, but now participatory budgeting is happening in every district, in every council district in the city, which enables community residents to engage in the capital budget process by meeting initially, and young teenagers can participate. You don't have to be a voter, don't have to be a citizen, everybody's invited. And usually the council member has one or two meetings in the district, and people suggest projects, and groups go off to decide which projects they want to support. And then everybody in the community can vote on the projects. They're not large budget items, but they're important items. Doing something for a school, doing something for a senior center, they're parks, they're very consistent. There's something called Checkbook New York City, where you literally can go in and see what kind of expenditures the city is making. The public advocate you can file a complaint with the public advocate online. Public advocate has a number of publications. Public advocate can sponsor legislation in the city council, so you can find out legislation that the public advocate finds. The Independent Budget Office is a wonderful thing that was passed in the charter of the 80s. The head of the office is appointed not by the city council, not by the mayor, but by a committee that designates a head. They don't report to the mayor, they do not report to the council, but they do respond to requests for studies and for information. They do reports on all kinds of budget items and services in the city. They, in fact, do an analysis of the mayor's budget before it is submitted. And they do wonderful literature. They have literature about the city, about the budget. It's really very good. I advise you to scroll down the Independent Budget Office and see what you can find. And then you want to know who represents you. I told you to call your community board, your council member. So you can go on mygovnyc.org. Is the league part of that? It seems to be. I'm not sure. It's a city website, or if it's the leagues. I'm not sure, but it's a wonderful website. Hi, and you put
it is actually a league website. Yes, we work on it with CUNY.
That's what I thought, because we always had it, and we do a book called They Represent You, which we do after each election, and we do maps, and we do those with CUNY. So I thought it was a joint venture. It's a wonderful thing. You go in, you just write down your address, and what will come back is all your representatives, state, federal, state, city, and your community board, with addresses and phone numbers, and I believe websites. So I highly recommend that. And then we have some news sources that I think we should talk about. One of our disadvantages in New York City is, because we are New York City, local politics does not get handled in the press the way it might if we lived in a small town or in Peoria, Illinois. Our local press really concentrates on more national issues than others, and sometimes what happens locally does not get much play. You don't know about it. These are 3 free resources online. Now, the organizations that publish them certainly would like contributions, and occasionally they ask for them, but you can go online basically every day to look at these publications. Gotham Gazette is published by the Citizens Union, and it's on every day. GothamGazette.com, you can sign up to receive it every day. City and State First Read is done by cityandstate.com, and that actually comes out twice a day. And online, you can sign up for it. They also have a magazine, the City and State magazine. I think you have to pay for that. I'm not sure. City Limits is a wonderful organization. It started as a housing organization, and most of their publication was on housing, but now they're more general about city issues, and they come out weekly. And they're really terrific sources. I open them up every day, and they're terrific sources. I mean, I'm a city junkie, I guess, by this time, and they're terrific sources for finding out what's going on in the city, and for helping know where you can go and who's doing what and who's saying what. So I recommend all of them, and I think I have I've covered it. I'm happy to ask any questions that anyone may have. And I'm sure I left out lots of things, but I hope this gives you some idea of how you can participate in city government and have it make a change and have an effect. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Before we have our question and answers, and I hope people are writing in on those, we can share this information. I'm not really sure. Can we just, Leslie, can we send it to people, or how does that work? Or can they take pictures of it?
Hi, Joanna. Well, I mean, certainly people can take pictures of it if they like, but we can post this to our website.
Oh, to the website? Okay.
So that people can access it, and we can send that link out after the fact.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I also just want to mention that the book, How New York, how your book.
What makes New York City run?
Yes, it's a great book. If you really want to have access to these links, I downloaded the ebook from Amazon, and every single link is connected to the internet. So you can just click it and go immediately to the website. It's just remarkable what you can find out. You can listen into city council testimonies. You can find out what's happening with the budget. You can watch, I think the mayor practically every day has some kind of recorded session on his little TV show.
Yeah,
So,
I want to add, I worked on this. This is the 4th edition, but I couldn't have done this without real help from Diane Burrows and from Judy Tashi, who worked to get the links in there. She really set it up and did the production, and Tiana Leonard was a proofreader, and the 3 of them worked endlessly and tirelessly, and the book would not have happened without them.
are there any questions? Have we gotten questions at all?
Yes, Joanna, we've got some questions in the chat right now. So I can go ahead and just start reading them off to Adrian. So thank you again, Adrian, for such a wonderful, informative chat. We're getting a lot of praise about it in the chat as well. So the first question I see is there a precedent regarding budgetary slashes to the NYPD or significant reallocation of funding to other departments in the past? And if so, what did that look like?
Well, I don't know. I don't know of major slashes to existing programs. I don't remember major slashes to the police budget, to the criminal justice budget. They do budget modifications in the course of the year, but those are usually at the behest of the mayor. And there have to, if there's anything more than 5%, $50,000 or 5% of the item, of the line item, they have to go to the council for approval. As I said, the mayor initiates those. There really are not that many substantial. I haven't seen it. I know that Ronnie Eldridge is on this. Well, she was the council person and she was my boss twice. And maybe Ronnie knows better on whether there's been substantial change in the course of the year on an agency's budget. I think it's highly unlikely. And there have been substantial cuts when we were in bed back in those days, in particularly education, because we lost state money, and they were very, very hard years. But I don't think there has been a substantial cut to any agency that I know of, and I'm not an expert, but I don't think so.
Okay, thank you very much. Next question then, how effective have community boards been historically in influencing the budget making process?
Well, they've been successful in some land they've been successful in getting services provided, and they're particularly successful when they work together. So they work together with the borough presidents, and the borough presidents can, in fact, use some influence to get money moved around in the budget. Again, they're a voluntary body, but they do represent, and the council people in those district councils also know, the council members actually They can nominate members of the community boards. The borough president appoints the community board members. But the city council people work very closely with community boards. These are their constituents, and city council staff works very closely with community boards. So the wishes of community boards, most of the time, are expressed most directly through the member of the council.
Great, thank you very much. Another question is, where does New York State come into the budget making process?
It doesn't come into the city budget making process, except if we budget for, if it doesn't come into the city budget making process, but we depend on state aid. So particularly state aid to education. The state contributes a great deal of money to education, and the city budget is premised on how much we're going to get from the state, because the state budget is passed before the city budget. So it's premised very much on, and there are other programs like that, how much the state has allocated to services in the city will depend on what the city has to put into the coffers. That's why this year is particularly challenging, because we know that state budget was unrealistic when it was passed. Everybody sort of knew it was unrealistic, and there are going to be substantial cuts, and the state legislature gave the governor a great deal of power to decide where those cuts were going to be. So we know there are cuts coming down. So that's how the state legislature affects the city's budget, that they decide if they think the city should fund something, and they will, again, if the city wanted to implement a fee or change the rate of a tax, they'd have to get approval from the state legislature. So there are, I mean, the city council passes bills all the time which have something attached called a home rule message. And what they're basically asking is the state to let them make this change. So the state does have a great deal to say about, they don't implement our budget, we do that ourselves, but the way they act and what's in their budget very much affects what the city's budget is.
Thank you. That's great. Now, next question. Can you walk us through the process of meaningfully holding the city accountable to the budget that gets passed?
Oh, yeah. I mean, yeah, because as I said, they can't modify it. If they can't modify it, they're limited in how much they can modify, how much the budget that gets passed. Budget modifications are limited, as I said, to 5% of a budget line, and the council has to approve that. They can't move money around in any great amount without the approval of the council. The one thing they can do is they can probably not spend the money. It wouldn't be a formal holding back the money, but the program wouldn't get up and started. And the council may or may not notice that program is there. But they have to give these management reports. The Office of Management and Budget, the mayor, they have to do quarterly reports on what's happening in the city, how the budget is being spent, what services are being provided, where there are increases in services and decreases in services. And those reports, and I think they're quarterly, I might be wrong, but the charter requires them, and I think they're quarterly. They have to be made to the city council. I think what happened when they reallocated our budget is they really made it, difficult to just use money wherever the mayor wants to use it. That's not so easily done in our budget anymore.
And if I think about a real example that came up during the whole budget process, the slashing of the overtime budget for the police, but then there's a belief that the police have overrun that in the past without any kind of consequence. How does something like that work out then?
Well, it doesn't work out when you're doing it in 2 weeks, and that's part of the problem. I mean, they just said no more overtime. Well, I mean, what does that mean? That's what you have, that's really what the Office of Management and Budget, the mayor's budget office, they have to sit, and the council has to sit down and say, this is what it means. Either you're saying they can't work more than 35 hours a week, or this is the maximum. You have to set up structures. You just go and say less overtime. That was the haste with which that was done. If you really want to change program, you have to plan it, and you have to come up with a plan for it, and in the way it was done this year there was no planning. The same thing with the moving the school safety officers to the Department of Education. There had to be some planning for that. There had to be some planning. There had to be personnel changes. There had to be a plan for training, for recruitment. And I read that it isn't going to happen right away because there was no plan for it. So the budget was cut. The major thing the city council can do is they cut the budget by $1 billion to the police department. And the department is going to have to figure out how to make cuts. Because I don't know if it was a total billion by the time, but whatever they said, you're not getting this money directly to the police department, then they have to figure out how they're going to make cuts because they're not getting that money. And yeah, it may not be they may not be cutting what other people think they should be cutting, but they're going to have to make a cut because they don't have the money.
So if they run over on overtime, then they have to take that from somewhere else in their own allotted budget, or can they overrun their allotted budget?
They can't overrun their budget. Modifying a budget means moving from one. Now, I guess if they had a budget modification that went through the council, maybe. I don't think so. I think that the budget's the budget, and and they have to also report quarterly or monthly. I mean, there are controls that the budget office and the Office of Management Budget have over agencies. And the city council can hold hearings and say, what are you doing? You were supposed to cut overtime. Why have you cut overtime? City council can have hearings on anything they want to have hearings on. And there is oversight over the course of the year over every city agency. And there are oversight hearings that are held regularly on a city agency and what they're doing to meet what the council said they were supposed to do in the budget.
Okay, great. We have about 4 more questions that I'm seeing right now. And of course, we may still get a few more. I am conscious we have about 20 minutes left. So let me keep going. How did the Board of Estimate differ from the Senate, which has 2 reps per state, no matter the population, or 2 senators per state?
That was in the Constitution. That was in the U.S. Constitution, that you would have 2 senators from the state, which had nothing to do with, that was set in the Constitution. Our city government was not set in the Constitution, and they found our form of government unconstitutional. As someone who was around when the Board of Estimate was operating, I wasn't unhappy to see it go. It was a team of people who really kept control of what was going on in the city. And by giving the city council more authority, it democratized government, because that really is a more democratic body.
Great, thank you. Somebody asked the question whether or not the police were put under the Department of Education budget for the schools in the last budget.
Yeah, but that wasn't the police. It's the school safety officers. They're not police. People may think they're police. They may think they're police. The police certainly don't think they're police. They're not police. They're school safety officers. And initially they were in the Department of Education budget years and years ago. And they weren't thought to be doing a very good job in that budget, which was why they were transferred to the police. Did they become militarized? I've spoken in a lot of high schools, and I know that high school students despise them. They think they spend their whole time hassling them. And I think that's a training issue. To say eliminate them, I mean, nobody's asking my opinion, but I'm thinking, what I think about is when you arrive at a school and somebody is there to take your name and your information and bar you from the school if you don't belong there. And I think that's a real issue. My daughter, who teaches in an elementary school, said, please don't take away our safety officer. She's wonderful. But that may be a rare exception. But I think there has to be somebody at the door of a public school to assure that no one who doesn't belong in that school is coming in. And that could be students from another school who are there to make trouble. It can be the parent, the non-custodial parent of a child who comes in to take the child out of the school. So you need something. I don't know what it is. You need something, but they weren't supposed to be police. Maybe you have to change their uniforms. And maybe it is the Department of Education who should be training them in a different way than the police department. But they're not cops. They didn't go through the police academy. They are, and most of them are women, and not that highly paid. And so something should be done. And I think the problem now is they just haven't figured out what to be done. It could happen in the course of the year, and I think it is something that that people who are concerned about it should constantly be contacting their city council person to see what's happening with this and is this being improved. That's something the city council can hold as many hearings as they want to and oversight to see if the changes are being made as they should be made.
Okay, great. And we've got now 3 more questions. So let me ask this one. How do you think the pandemic is going to affect what we know about the budget and the process? And what kind of effect do you think it might have in the fiscal 22 budget? For example, might we even have less say than we do today?
I don't know if we'll have less. I mean, I think there are going to be really serious cuts in the budget. I think the schools, I mean, the first step is the schools. This is a real crisis on what's going to happen in the schools. If you're going to be doing 2 systems, if you're going to be teaching remotely and having some kids learning remotely and having teachers in the schools 5 days a week, they can't be, the teachers who are in the schools are not going to be teaching remotely. And so you're going to have another body of teachers getting computers for all the kids. I think they basically they have done that already. So that's going to be a very expensive. You're going to have to do something with school buses. School buses will not have to be full. Are you going to have double the number of school buses? That's going to be very expensive. And I don't know how many of those things come directly from the state and how much what are specifically out of city funds. So the schools are really going to be a problem. I think the hospitals are in trouble, and the city hospitals are in trouble because they spent a fortune to treat coronavirus patients and didn't get other patients in. People who came in for elective surgery weren't there. People weren't going to hospitals for use. They had to buy tremendous amount of equipment. So the whole healthcare system, community health centers have been closed down. And we don't know what kind of sicknesses people have gotten while they haven't been going to community health centers. All of that is going to cost money, and they're going to have to find it. Now they're hoping that they're going to get some of it from the federal government, but they're not getting it from the state because I don't think the state has it. The MTA loss is really a big state loss, and the state hasn't been collecting taxes. People haven't paid taxes. People who haven't paid rent, owners haven't paid real estate taxes, which is a big source of income for us in the city. It's our major source of income, are real estate taxes. So the pandemic has and it's not over, and it possibly could come back, and we may have to close down again. So all we did when they passed the budget was to pass a budget which dealt with the costs that they knew had already incurred. And that is not anticipation of the costs that are continuing to incur over time. I'm not an expert, but I think that this is going to be a very hard year. The new budget's going to be very hard. But there will be a budget, and somebody's going to make a decision on what gets funded and what doesn't get funded, and what gets cuts and what gets increases. And that's an opportunity for people to make sure that their voice is heard on what they think should be funded and what is not as important. And that's really, when there's lots of money, everybody gets everything, but we're not in that situation anymore. And I think this is the time when it really is crucial for people to to get involved.
Got it. So we're going to take 2 more questions, and there's actually more than 2 questions, Adrian. So what we'll do is send you the other questions, and hopefully you can, write up some responses, if you don't mind.
Not at all.
But so the last 2 questions, I think, one is, it kind of segues from something you said in your last response, which is, when we're looking at the departmental budgets, how do citizens understand where that funding is coming from? So for example, the Department of Education receives local, state, and federal funds. So how do we understand, what that looks like?
Well, actually, you can go into online. You can look up this. There's a revenue budget, and it sort of tells you how much comes from this. And you can go online and find the revenue budget, and it tells you how much comes from the federal government, how much comes from the state, how much comes from the city, how much comes from parking fines. It's not broken up by program, but you do get a sense of how much money we're getting for the federal government, how much the state is contributing. And because they break down in this revenue budget how they're paying for services, not service by service, but they break down where the revenue is coming from. It may be service for service, because I guess they'll say how much education money they're getting from the state, how much money they're getting for criminal justice from the federal government, how much they're getting from Medicaid. So it may be broken down that way. I'm not sure, but it is there. You can see the revenue budget to see where the money's coming from.
Great, thank you. And then the last question we'll take tonight is, does the public have a say in a way that agencies report the budget use? Because there have been concerns around lack of transparency with how agencies report their spending, such as the police.
Yeah, well, I'm sure. I'm sure that every agency presents it in the most glowing, non-controversial way they can. I work for the rent agency. There's nothing more confrontational than rent administration in New York. So you do it in as positive a way you can. That's really where the city council comes in. I mean, it really is up to the city council to question how money's being spent and where it's being spent. And now it's an interesting time, because of that, in 21, this budget will be the council that's in place now. And a large part of that council is term limited out. So maybe that'll make them more courageous. I'm not sure if they're term limited out, unless they've got another job they're looking at. But they've already announced in Gotham Gazette, I saw a list of potential candidates running for the council in these various districts. And if I really felt seriously about this, I'd go question the candidates. And see who supports the issues that I support. And if nothing more, they can become vocal supporters of the things that you think are important in the community, because they want to be elected in November 21. So that should be that's a source of figuring it out.
Okay. We're going to stop this now. Adrian, there is so much praise coming through here. You have been awesomely awesome. I hope you've given us so much information, and there are more questions. Usually when we do this in person, people can come up afterwards and talk to the speaker, but since that's really not possible, if you have something very important that you really want to know about, I suggest you write into the office. I believe the email is office at what is it? Leslie, it's
office at lwvnyc.org. It's actually at the top of the chat.
Right. And just write it out, and we'll send it on to Adrian, who can probably get back to you, because this has just been remarkable. I mean, just remarkable amount of information. We really, really appreciate you doing this for us. It gives us a much better understanding of what we're in for. So, so thank you. I hope you all will be interested in our next event, which is going to be on August 18th, I believe. That's a Tuesday. And that will be another Adrian Austin.
Yeah.
We'll talk about education. So that's we're running. We'll hope she's as good as you are. Anyway, thank you. Thank you all for coming. I hope this has been informative for everybody. And hopefully we'll see you again soon. Thank you.